Welcome to episode 6 of the Princeton Podcast with Mayor Mark Freda. In this episode, Mark invited Jim Waltman, Executive Director of the Watershed Institute, to discuss, among many topics, the impact of stormwater runoff in the greater Princeton area. They discussed Jim's background, from his youth here in Princeton to his early career experiences as a researcher in the Galapagos Islands and later in Venezuela, to his political experiences representing the National Audubon Society in Washington, D.C. Jim also discussed his current role as the Executive Director of the Watershed Institute, its mission and research activities, its 1,000-acre Watershed Reserve, and the educational exhibits and conferences at the Watershed Center. So without any further introduction, let's join our host, Mark Freda, and his guest, Jim Waltman, for episode 6 of the Princeton Podcast.
Jim, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Sure. It's great to be with you, Mark.
Thank you. So I think, first off, why don't you just tell us, what do you do?
Yeah. So I'm the executive director of the Watershed Institute. We're a nonprofit water conservation, land conservation focused organization. And we've been working for a little over 70 years in this area to keep our water clean, safe, and healthy.
Yeah, which is great. So let me ask you some other questions. We'll come back to the watershed in a little bit. But Jim, did you grow up in Princeton?
I did. My parents moved me and my 3 sisters to Princeton in the late 60s. So I grew up in Princeton, and I'm proud to have graduated from Johnson Park Elementary School, the middle school here in town, and Princeton High School. Yeah. So it was a great place to grow up, as a lot of people view, and really had a chance to get out and experience some of Princeton's dreams and some wild places before they were parks. Not always legally, I guess, back as a youngster growing up here.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. It's also, and we'll tie this in a little bit later, but I always think for someone in your position and all the things that the watershed tries to do, for you to have that kind of history and knowledge of the area is pretty important. But before we get to all that, and so then after high school, college, what degree?
Yeah, I didn't go far. I went to Princeton University. I graduated in biology. I started college thinking I wanted to be a doctor, a medical doctor, and instead fell in love with ecology and evolution, and the environment. And so that kind of got me started along the path that I would ultimately lead me to the watershed.
That's pretty amazing. That's great. All right, so you graduate college, and then where'd you go first after that?
Well, I got really lucky. I lucked into about an 8-month job as a research assistant down in the Galapagos Islands. So there were a couple that had just arrived from the University of Michigan, Peter and Rosemary Grant. They were new faculty at Princeton, didn't have grad students yet, didn't have research assistants yet. So I went down to the Galapagos in early 1987. And so was studying the Darwin's finches and Galapagos mockingbirds down there. And so that was my real, first experience in an incredibly wild and beautiful place. And what a impact that had on my life, seeing all these incredible animals in a setting where they weren't used to people. So there were, a lot of close encounters, shall we say.
Right. What an amazing experience. So you were there for 8 months.
I was there for 8 months, living in a tent on a rock. It was a island formed by a volcano. There were no roads, no buildings, no nothing. But we would have visitors on cruise ships about once a week or so, once every couple of weeks, and they would let us come out to the boat and tell our little stories of what we were doing, what we were studying, and we'd get a free meal out of it. And eventually we figured out how to get mail sent to us that way. So it worked out pretty nicely. But it was a real wilderness experience. And, I was a pretty young guy. I was 22 years old or whatever. So it was pretty scary at first, but it was an experience that I carry with me still to this day. Just the memories were that strong and wonderful.
That's amazing. That what a great story. I don't know how many people could have an experience to top that one. So you come back from
I came back. I went to graduate school. I went to what was then called the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. It's now called the Yale School of the Environment. But I studied policy and science there. It was a great program. I got to take some courses in the law school and the School of Management, and met a incredible scientist, a guy named Steve Beisinger, who asked if I wanted to do some research with him. So on top of my Galapagos experience, I did some research in Venezuela in an area called the Llanos. It's a little bit like our Everglades, but more forested, very wet area, and study these little parrots, which are actually called parrotlets, green-rumped parrotlets. They're so small. So did that for about a year. I was back and forth there studying the parrots. And again, I thought I was on my way to being a field biologist and an academic scientist. And that didn't quite work out the way I thought it would, but my life took a little bit of a turn. I ended up, I thought I needed to take a little break between getting a master's degree and a PhD. So I went down to Washington, D.C. I did a 6-month internship with a nonprofit called the National Wildlife Federation, and ended up getting bitten by the political bug. I fell in love with politics and policy, something, frankly, I never took any coursework in college. But I ended up staying in Washington for 15 years. I was a Capitol Hill lobbyist for the National Audubon Society and the Wilderness Society. So very different side of things. I was wearing a suit, not wearing jeans and field gear, but loved it. Loved every minute of it.
What a transition.
Yeah.
I guess you don't know where the road takes you, but you just follow the road.
You just follow the road sometimes. And, I loved the energy of being in Washington. Politics were very different. I went down there in the early 90s, I guess 1990, when things were a lot more bipartisan. I enjoyed the challenge of getting Republicans to vote with us, and quite a few did back in the day. But it was a great job with both of those places. They also had me traveling quite a bit, to give talks and so forth. So I traveled to 45 different states during those 2 jobs, including Alaska and Hawaii. So I got to some really great states. It was great until it was less great, and then it wasn't great. And I kind of got tired of the politics in Washington. Kind of in the early to mid 2000s, things started getting quite different than they had been. Much more partisan, much more kind of nasty, and not as interesting, frankly.
Yeah, it's unfortunate when we look at I guess someday historians will look at the political history of our country and kind of look at those times and how we went from most people thinking, okay, I'm a different party, but what's best for the country, as opposed to let me put what I personally perceive as let me put my party before my country. So that does make it hard to get things done.
Exactly. So we were I spent time working on Alaska public land issues like oil drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, for example. And back in the late 90s, early 2000s, we had like 50 Republicans voting our way. We lost some Democrats, and we had 8 Republican senators vote to protect the Arctic Refuge, and we lost a few Democrats. It's just not that way anymore. It's completely partisan on most environmental issues. Yeah,
which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
So at some point you're tired of Washington, D.C., and then
Yeah.
how did you make your great escape?
Yeah, so I got a phone call. It was interesting. It was a very cold day, a little bit like this, and about this time of year. This was at the end of 2004, and I got a call from my sister, who was living in Hopewell Township, and next door neighbor of one of the board members of then we were called the Stony Brook Millstone Watershed Association. Yep. And I had just come out of a meeting with the chief of staff of a very conservative Republican who we thought we were going to get on this environmental issue because he was good friends with John McCain. And it ended up being brutal. This guy was accusing us of just using issues to raise money, and we didn't really, and so I was kind of at the bottom. It was cold. It was blustery. It was starting to hail. And I got this call from my kid sister saying, hey, do you know anybody that'd be interested in running this group called the Stony Brook something? I'm not sure what it's called. I went back to the office. I looked it up. A little embarrassed to say I grew up in Princeton. I didn't know about the Stony Brook Millstone Watershed Association. And thought, boy, this looks like a really interesting group. And the more I explored, it looked more and more interesting. So I threw my hat in the ring and ended up landing the job and came back to the area in the spring of 2005.
An amazing journey. So we're going to get into the watershed a little more in just a second. But in reading up on you, as I probed your past, I think you're involved with the State Agriculture Development Committee. So
yeah.
Another group that I'm sure most people have no idea even exists. What is that?
So it's got kind of a funny name because it sounds like, it's called the State Agriculture Development Committee. The point of it's a board, it's a state board. I was nominated by Governor Corzine. So I've been on this thing for a while and then had to be confirmed by the state Senate. Which they did back in 2008, I think. I'm trying to remember, 08 or 09. So the board has oversight of the farmland preservation program. So the name is a little odd because we're trying to keep farmland from being developed. But it's the only role I've had kind of working for the government, and it's been interesting and nourishing and frustrating for other reasons. But the state of New Jersey has a terrific farmland preservation program. Of course, farmland has disappeared and continues to really dramatically, but a lot of funds have gone into that. The state residents, the state voters have supported this overwhelmingly, and so it's been fun to serve on that board. We're facing tough questions now, like is it okay to put solar panels on a farm? And if so, how much? And, because we've got now competing concerns with climate change and needing to create more renewable, clean energy, but we want to preserve the farms at the same time. So, and that's kind of generally true. A lot of the environmental issues that were a little simpler, toxics, are they good or bad? Do we want to preserve land or not? Now there's an added dimension to some of them. When we have to be concerned with the climate and things like invasive species that weren't as big a problem, a few decades ago.
It's a real balancing act trying to.
It is.
Set priorities. And so let's jumping back to the watershed. So you're executive director.
Yeah.
So what do I do? What is it you do?
That's a really good question. So what I do is I set the big picture goals and direction of the organization, and then manage a staff. We have about 36 staff, terrific folks. They're scientists, educators, advocates, land stewards, and other professionals. And then I work with a board of directors and raise the money to keep the place going. But so the work we do includes monitoring streams for water pollution, trying to get an understanding on, what are the trends in the environment from the kind of natural side and the water side. We do environmental advocacy, trying to strengthen policies to better protect land and water. And we do work mostly at the very, very local level, like in the municipality here in Princeton, or at the state level, working with the legislature and the governor's administration, particularly the Department of Environmental Protection. And time to time, we work at the federal level too, working programs run by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and so forth. And then we do a very robust environmental education program. So we're serving 10,000 or more kids and adults a year. So I try to not get too deep into the details and let the terrific professionals we have do their thing. But the big goal of mine is to make sure these parts are integrated and make sure that everybody on our staff, whether they're a scientist or an environmental attorney, realizes that they're all educators, and we exist to try to increase the awareness and understanding of environmental issues, changing behaviors, changing mindsets, and sometimes changing laws. But It's a job to engage people and try to improve understanding and then help people become better environmentalists.
Yeah. So it seems to me, having like you been in the area for a long time, that the watershed's mission or scope has really expanded a lot from what it used to be.
It has, in a couple of ways. One, geographically. So we were founded, as I mentioned, as the Stony Brook Millstone Watershed Association. 13 syllables and a hyphen. And most of the people that I would meet and introduce myself, would have trouble remembering that name. But the name was very intentional because it described an organization that was focused on a region, and that region was the Stony Brook Millstone Watershed. So watershed is pretty, imagine it's an area of land that drains into a water body like a river or a lake. So think of a bowl or a funnel, that's a watershed, and it's all going to drain down to the bottom of the hole. Over time, our work has expanded. We still have this focus in this local region. We work in about 30 towns in the kind of central Jersey area. But we also do a lot of work across the state and a little bit outside the state. So we have folks that work on the statewide policy in Trenton. We have a contract with the state DEP where we run a statewide water monitoring program. So we're coordinating people from all over the state to do that. So we're a little bit of a hybrid, Mark. We still have the super local focus, but our work extends well beyond it now, including some relatively new work we're doing in the city of Trenton.
It's amazing. So that's great. But I think most organizations do hope that they can figure out what it is they need to do. And as times change, sometimes the mission and scope needs to adjust and change.
Yeah.
Also,
and, we're much more focused on climate change, global warming than we used to be. We fought for 7 years with others against the proposed PennEast pipeline through the area. That was an understanding that that pipeline would have harmed a lot of streams and our water supplies. But it was also kind of related to the climate. So indirectly, the climate's the biggest threat we have to our water. So we have to acknowledge that and fight that where we can as well.
Yeah. So let me just throw a little plug in here. You mentioned this before, but the Watershed is a nonprofit, right?
We are.
Okay. Yep. So if I send you a check, that's tax deductible.
That's tax deductible.
All right.
Thanks for bringing that up.
That's okay. I just thought I'd mention that just in case. I'm sure there are a lot of people asking that in their mind just now.
And if I could be so bold, you could go on our website at this very minute, thewatershed.org, and make a donation. And I think residents of Princeton, your mayor just kind of suggested that you do that. So that may get edited out of this podcast. We'll see.
We'll see. But feel free. Well, it's there's so many valuable and worthwhile nonprofits in this area. But it's always, whenever we have a chance to draw attention to any of them, I think it's worthwhile doing. But let's jump to stormwater management, right? Because I think stormwater management and the watershed go hand in hand. And what climate change, everything, but stormwater management, after some of the storms we've just been through recently, what a hot topic right now.
Absolutely. So, we call it polluted stormwater runoff, and it is the biggest impact of climate change, certainly in this area and much of this country and much of the world. And two things are going on at the same time that makes this a bigger and bigger problem. Number one is climate change. So we're seeing bigger and bigger storms, and the scientists are, they have witnessed this going back, looking at the data. The big storms are getting bigger. And they're projecting forward, we're only going to have more and more of these big storms. So, the Ida this summer, unbelievable. So a lot of places in the state got more than 3 inches in 1 hour, more than 10 inches in 24 hours. That used to be kind of unheard of, almost unimaginable. The second thing that has happened over time, as we've developed the state, we add what people refer to as impervious surfaces. So these are hard surfaces, parking lots, rooftops that don't allow water to percolate through them. So there's less room for the water to go and more water. So it's as they say, it's not rocket science. It's creating more flooding. The state of New Jersey in 2004 adopted some, at the time, considered very aggressive stormwater rules. And in New Jersey, of course, each town has to enforce the state regulations. But now we're looking back and we're saying, well, those were a good set of rules as far as they went, but we really need to do more. So in this state, when you build something new, if somebody's going to tear down a forest and put in a shopping center, you have to address the stormwater that runs off from the shopping center. And the regulators, be they with the state or the town, they have to compare what would have happened when the forest was there versus what happens when the shopping center is built, right? The problem is that much of our state and older towns like Princeton, most of the development happened a long time ago, right? So strong stormwater rules that mitigate new stormwater from new developments, well, that helps make sure the problem doesn't get any worse, but you never catch up. And so what we've been advocating, and we've been in the conversation with the town for a few years now, is that when a developed area is redeveloped, in other words, you're going to tear one building down and build something different, that's an important opportunity to add some stormwater mitigation, right? Some way of taking the water that would otherwise run off and cause flooding downstream and either hold on to it for a while before releasing it, or try to infiltrate it, try to help it percolate down into the ground, right? So if we can do that, then every time a piece of land is redeveloped, then we can start incrementally chipping away at the problem of this polluted stormwater runoff.
Which will take a long time. And I think people need to understand it's a new world. So let me throw a couple things at you. Correct me if I'm wrong. So as you said, storms will occur more frequently and they'll be bigger.
Yeah.
So you could live in an area that never flooded, and now it's going to start to flood.
That's right. And it's really, it's pretty grim, frankly. When you look forward, as you said, there are towns that, or not towns, but homes, businesses that have never flooded in the past. And now because the precipitation is higher, the storms are bigger, maybe the area around them is more developed, they're more flood prone. And, unfortunately, we have to find the areas that flood the most, and we're going to have to spend some money helping people get to safer ground. It's just kind of the reality. There's towns in the state that have seen this over and over again. There's others that are just starting to. I spent a day in the town of Manville, not far from here, with the mayor, and he was walking me around, just showing me home after home after home that now are, you can't occupy them anymore. And you got, people living in their cars until they figure out something they can do. And it's not anything anybody did wrong knowingly, right? We made some mistakes before we knew they were mistakes by building in places that were prone to flooding or would become prone to flooding, and by not managing the stormwater from developments for a long, long time. But now we know better, and we need to kind of try to take some new corrective actions. And I think there's a lot of hope that we can do that.
Right. And I think if people are purchasing a property, they need to pay attention to, maybe on a flood map, this shows as a 100-year floodplain. Well, that's probably not a 100-year floodplain anymore, right? I mean, at some point, all that stuff's going to have to be adjusted because more storms, larger storms, what used to happen every 100 years, maybe it's happening every 20. What used to happen every 20 is maybe, it's
that's
domino effect.
Absolutely. And I know that that FEMA has been working on revising their maps for quite a while, and the state DEP likewise. And, this isn't, some people in who live in New Jersey think this is just a sea level rise issue. If you're living on the coast, you're in trouble. This is just an issue for all of us. So, I live in Hopewell Borough, and fortunately for us, we're on a little bit of a hill there. But the lower spots in Hopewell Borough, small town, fewer than 2,000 residents, just got hammered. In Henry and then Ida again. And I'm afraid we're going to see that more and more into the future.
Right. And towns need to take a regional approach on this, because it's not like the water knows, well, I fell in Princeton, I'll stay in Princeton, or I fell in Hopewell, I'll stay in Hopewell, right? So there's this whole downstream effect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We all live in a watershed, which means we're all suffering the consequences of the folks upstream from us. And we're doing something unknowingly, perhaps, that's impacting the folks that live downstream from us. So it really does require regional effort, regional conversations, and planning.
Yeah. So let me just jump, thanks so much for spending that time with us on stormwater, because it is critical and everybody needs to be aware of it.
Well, and let me just say, I don't want to miss this. Princeton's taken some really bold steps, and so the town's to be commended. The state regulations say you need to start mitigating stormwater if you add about 11,000 square feet of new impervious surface. That's a big development.
That's a lot.
So you miss a lot. And to your credit, Princeton said, well, boy, if you add, I think it's 400 square feet of impervious cover, you got to do something to mitigate the stormwater. So that, that's a tough program. It's a bold program. And it's really important.
Yeah. Well, part of what we're hoping to change too is that what people would come in, there's a threshold now. And so they'd come in just under the threshold. Then they'd come in with a second project that takes them over the threshold and say, hey, it's two separate projects. So part of what we're changing is we're going to look at them both, because, the impact on everybody around you is too severe for us to play this game with.
Exactly. So, that the environment suffers from what are called externalities, things that cost society, they cost other people something, but we don't quantify it, right? So we're not very good at assessing the impact that we have on other people, whether we, build something and it impacts the folks downstream, or we adopt a policy. And so it's really important to understand those things and then plan for it.
Yeah. So let me jump to just a little bit different part of what you mentioned before was education. And, I've been out at the Watershed Institute property a number of times. I was out there recently for your fundraiser. Very well done. Amazing job by your staff. Incredible. But it's a very interesting property. And so for those that have not visited it yet, but will go there sometime in the near future, since they should, can you just you have trails, you have boardwalks, go ahead.
Yeah. So, and that's, it's a joy. When I go to work every morning, I pinch myself, because it's a beautiful place. Our home is almost 1,000 acres now. It's an area called the Watershed Reserve, and it's got a real mix of habitats, from mature woods to meadows, wetlands, streams that go through there. We have the Stony Brook comes right through the property. More than 10 miles of hiking trails, and we're building a boardwalk which is fully ADA compatible. So to make the grounds more accessible, we've built about 1,000 feet, and we're working on about a half-mile trail. And then within the reserve, we have this beautiful building that's now about half a dozen years old, the Watershed Center. It's a LEED Platinum facility, which means it's very green. It's got a lot of energy conservation and water conservation and smart water management strategies developed into it. The building has a bunch of exhibits about nature and renewable energy and so forth, and then some live animal exhibits. So snakes and turtles and fish and frogs are all there to teach kids. And then we have, so the Watershed Institute facilities open to the public, dawn to dusk, 7 days a week. For casual visitors. And then we have programs for folks, programs for schools, programs for families, programs for adults. And you can check all that out on our website, also at thewatershed.org.
Right. And you just had your a conference. I know I attended a couple sessions virtually. I wasn't able to go out and be there in person, but number of elected officials, staff from all kinds of municipalities, and all sorts of impressive guests and speakers. And
yeah, so we do this annual conference. It's the New Jersey Watershed Conference. It's mostly about watershed science and policy. We had to go virtual last year, and we tried the hybrid this year. It worked pretty well. We had, I think we had about 150 people virtual and maybe 50 in person. But so we're all trying to figure out how to do that hybrid thing. But some great speakers, a lot of information on stormwater management and open space management, and the science and policy of all that.
Yeah, it is to me, it's amazing all that the Watershed Institute accomplishes, and you and your staff are to be complimented. And maybe we could just tell people actually where you're located. That could be, that will help them find it, because they're going to go visit it soon.
Yeah, I hope so. So we're located in Hopewell Township near Pennington, right? I got to give my props to both our hometowns there. And we're kind of midway between Route 31 to our west and what's called Pennington Rocky Hill Road to our east. Pennington Rocky Hill Road kind of swerves around and becomes Cherry Valley Road. So you can find us on the Google map very easily. Just type in the Watershed Institute, and you'll find different ways to get there. But very close by, we're less than 10 miles from downtown Princeton. It'll take you about 15 minutes to get out.
Yeah, nice ride. And for those people that go and buy corn and vegetables and fruit at Kerr's Farm Stand, you're just down the road from there. So there's a landmark that I think many people are familiar with.
Very close by. And if you know that the old Bristol Myers Squibb had their Hopewell campus right across the street from us.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So Jim, thank you very much for being with us today. This has been very informative.
Well, thanks for having me on. And Mark, thanks for your leadership of Princeton.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for the 6th episode of the Princeton Podcast, produced as a community service by HG Media, providing audio, video, and website design services here in Princeton since 1999. If you enjoyed this episode of the Princeton Podcast, please share it with your friends, and be sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts.